using so many of the essential techniques to break people down and build them up in their image and refreeze that identity and suppress the old identity and try to create an information wall around the members so that they would work long hours and stay away from family and friends who would raise questions, cause them to reflect.
Yeah. Before we go into a break, you mentioned hypnotism, and I wanted to share a quote with you that I found in my researches. This was from a lecture by the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, and it's called Axiom 53, The Axiom of the Stable Datum. And I'm quoting this. If you can produce enough chaos, it says in a textbook on this subject, if you can produce enough chaos, you can assume the total management of a psyche. If you can produce enough chaos, the way you hypnotize people is to misalign them in their own control and realign them under your control, which necessitates a certain amount of chaos, don't you see? We have to take a station identification break. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. We're back with our guest, Steve Hassan. Steve is a nationally certified counselor and licensed mental health counselor. He's the author of two of the most respected books on the subject of cults, Combating Cult Mind Control, and the one we're discussing today, Releasing the Bonds. Steve is the founder of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, Incorporated. Steve, before the break, I read a quote from Hubbard on hypnosis and how to induce a hypnotic state using chaos. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I want to just say that for me, the better term is confusion. And I should also say that I've studied hypnosis now since 1980, again, as part of my research into understanding how cults and mind control operate. And the fastest way to induce a trance is to confuse someone. And one of the fastest ways to confuse someone is to disrupt a person's patterned expectations. And so there's for example, a handshake induction where you reach out your hand and the person reaches out their hand and you shake the hand and then the hypnotist doesn't let go of the hand. And it creates a momentary confusion in the subject's mind because why isn't this person letting go of my hand? And depending on whether or not the person is very hypnotizable, people can be induced to do all kinds of things that are totally against their best interest. And I would direct your listeners, if you would like to see a demonstration of this, what I exactly just mentioned is there's an entertainer in the UK called Darren Brown, Derren Brown. And on YouTube, you can watch him walk up to people on the street, ask them for directions, shake their hand, and get their wallet, their cell phone, and their keys in less than a minute and walk away with them. And Darren Brown claims he can do this 2/3 of the time with people that he selects. And that reminds me of the 2/3 number of the Asch conformity study or the Milgram obedience study, where 2/3 of the people will start saying a 2-inch line is a 3-inch line just because everyone else in the room is saying that congruently. Or 2/3 of the people electrocute another human being because some guy who's an authority figure in a white lab coat is telling them to. And it just speaks about how adaptive we are to our environment, how susceptible we are to our peer group, how susceptible we are to authority figures. And the thing about hypnosis and altered states of consciousness is they're actually quite useful and wonderful. The issue is if someone has an ulterior motive or has an agenda, like getting you into a group or indoctrinating you or getting your money or getting you into bed, that's where the problem is. Because essentially, when you're in a trance state, you're not critically evaluating what's happening. You're kind of in the moment, in the flow, in the zone. And that's where a lot of people get into trouble, where they go to religious groups and they're doing deep meditations or deep prayers, and the leader starts adding in their own stuff, and in a step-by-step way get them deeper and deeper involved. And it's very, very dangerous.
Over to the counseling function for
Well, let
recovery.
me just,
Okay, go
can I
ahead.
interrupt, Tom, and
Sure,
just
go
say that
go ahead.
the other thing that the public should know is this Hubbard was a stage hypnotist. It's a fact. It's not a hypothesis. So we know for a fact he studied hypnosis, and we know for a fact that he was using it for entertainment on people. So, and the trick, as I understand it, is that people in Scientology believe that they're being dehypnotized by doing Scientology, and they think that everyone else in the world is hypnotized, when in fact it's the other way around. They are being hypnotized by Hubbard and his techniques and his system. And really, I invite anyone who's a Scientologist or has ever been in Scientology to start reading some books about hypnosis and how it's used and what different induction techniques are. You'll find it very, very illuminating, to say the least.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Sure.
Going to recovery from cults. In the past, exit counseling was used to begin the recovery of a cult member, the recovery process. What were the shortcomings of this method, and what have you found to improve the opportunities of recovery of a cult member and healing of the cult member's family?
So, short history. Back when I was rescued from the Moonies, what was being done was deprogramming, which was basically taking people by force or with a conservatorship and sequestering them in a room and keeping them away from the group, and then, exposing them to former members and such. And I was involved with a number of those cases with people in the Moonies, and some of them were legal, some of them were not. It was very stressful. Even though most people left the Moonies, it was not something I liked doing as much as I like helping get people out of cults. And so I stopped that in 1977, and yet I wanted to figure out how to help individuals and groups. So I developed an exit counseling kind of approach, which was basically a voluntary version of that. And it basically put the pressure on the family to get the person to agree to sit down for 3 days and learn about brainwashing and mind control and meet former members and have an opportunity to reevaluate whether or not they want to spend the rest of their life in the group. And that worked pretty darn well until my book came out, Combating Cult Mind Control, and I think almost every cult leader bought a copy and read it and went, okay, no one's going home for 3 days. No one's going without an escort, or, it just nipped it in the bud.
Well, I think your book became a required reading for Scientology's Office of Special Affairs, the
Yeah,
Combating
absolutely.
Cult Mind Control book.
Yeah, virtually every group, the leader or someone in the hierarchy read the book, and I know with Kip McKean, the former head of the International Churches of Christ, he literally stood up in front of 15,000 followers, held my book aloft, and said anyone reading this book was going to hell. And marked me as a wolf in sheep's clothing, and blah 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 blah. People were forbidden from talking to me or reading my book. But the problem became how to get access. If the person would never be allowed to go home by themselves for a 3-day weekend or something, then the family would never have the opportunity to ask the person to please sit down, with tears, and at least consider another point of view. And that kind of forced me to rethink how to help. And essentially, what I had to come up with was a much more family and network solution, wherein I spend a lot more time working with family members and friends and former members and coaching them on patterns of communication that I found are effective with people in cults. And so it became more of an empowerment model to family and friends, and encouraging them to interact with their loved one and essentially chip away at the indoctrination. And then, of course, when, post 95 or so, when the internet started blooming, that changed the entire paradigm. So this approach could work even better, because then if people could get access to a computer and information could be online, you didn't need someone to come with boxes of books and literature. You could go online and start reading. So the issue became even more how to motivate a person to get past their phobias so that they'll, consider another point of view. And so in releasing, I know we'll do the second part of the book on another interview, but a big piece is what I refer to as a 3-step phobia intervention, where if you can help someone realize that it's not, grounded in reality, that there's danger to look at literature that the group doesn't want you to look at, it opens the door for them to walk out. And so my whole approach is really about encouraging the locus of control to be within a person and not in some outside authority figure. And so I view my approach as not kind of rescuing people per se, or telling people, what they need to do with their life. It's much more of a, let me share my journey, let me share what I've learned, and you think about your own life journey and what your goals are and what your talents and abilities are, and who you really love and what you want out of your life, and empower them to go for it. People leave these totalistic groups because the groups are not delivering what they promise, and people realize it, and they realize that they could be in the group for another 50 years and the world's not going to be at peace, and everyone is not going to be recruited to the Moonies or Scientology, and life goes on. So why not live it?
And you call this new approach the strategic interaction approach, correct?
Correct. So for example, on a very simple example, I'll give you an example of what my father did wrong in 1974. He read in the newspaper one day that Moon had an M16 gun factory in South Korea. Got on the phone, called me up. Steve, Moon has an M16 gun factory. What kind of messiah has an M16 gun factory? And of course, Steve started thought stopping. Crush Satan, glory to heaven, peace on earth, inside my mind. I didn't do it verbally, I just did it internally. And I was convinced that my father had been possessed by Satan. So my father's good intentions to get me to step back and question what the group was doing had the exact opposite effect. And I'd say 90% of most family members say the wrong thing in the wrong way and wind up alienating their loved one further, unfortunately, and sending them in the direction where the group is going to control them even more.